was able to defeat the other. Deprived of victory, the Athenians grew increasingly frustrated. Were they not the greatest state in all of Greece? Surely the time must come for Athens to prove her power once and for all. Then, in the year 416 BC, a daring proposal was put before the assembly. A proposal which, even if it did not defeat the Spartans, would at least satisfy Athens' hunger for glory. A small Greek colony on the island of Sicily had asked for protection. Protection from a neighbor allied with Sparta. Why should the Athenians not come to their aid, humiliate their Spartan adversary, and perhaps conquer all of Sicily at the same time? As one Athenian addressed the assembly,
"This is the way we won our empire, and this is the way all empires have been won. Let us set out on this expedition, for it will destroy the arrogance of the Spartans, and at the same time we shall become rulers of all Greece."
it was a bold plan to be executed on a vast scale, requiring a great fleet of warships and a landing force of over 10,000 men. The Athenians threw themselves into the project with fervor. Armorers beat out new weapons. Soldiers tested out their equipment. Stores were loaded onto a fleet of Athenian triremes. And the shipwrights prepared their vessels for the sea. Then, to great fanfare, the mighty invasion force set out for Sicily. Six months later, word came back. The campaign was not going as quickly as hoped. They needed reinforcements. And then, nothing. No news at all. Then, in the autumn of 413 BC, a sailor arrived in the city. A man who needed a haircut. And as he talked to his barber, he told an appalling tale of a vast and terrible slaughter. It was the story of an invading army that had been pinned down where it landed, of how its leaders had argued with each other about strategy, of how their food and water had run out, of how they'd attempted to ford a great river in a desperate attempt to escape.
They rushed into it, all discipline lost, and every man wanting to cross first. They fell over each other and trod each other underfoot, and they drank thirstily. The water was foul, but still they went on drinking, mud, blood and all, the dead lying thick in the riverbed.
This was how the Athenians discovered that they had been the victims of one of the greatest defeats in ancient history. Over 50,000 men had been killed or taken prisoner. 2 entire fleets of Athens' prized triremes had been destroyed.
The Sicilian campaign is a mess for a variety of reasons. First of all, it's a long way away. It's over 600 or 700 miles. Once they arrive, they squabble and fight about what to do. But perhaps the biggest problem is there's not a tactical reason to do it. There's not a strategic reason to do it. The motivation is highly self-interested.
The Athenians, entranced by a vision of imperial glory, had in fact engaged in a pointless and vain campaign.
They believed wrongly that they could go quickly in, raise the countryside, and win a quick victory and a rich tributary subject state.
Thucydides recorded the scale of the devastation.
This was the most notorious action that we know of in Greek history, for they were absolutely, calamitously defeated. The losses were total. Army, navy, everything was destroyed.
With Athens' military power now crippled, her enemies began to close in. The Persians, whom the Athenians had humiliated 50 years before, now saw the ideal opportunity for revenge. They approached the Spartans with the offer of help.
The Persians have been watching this carefully, and they decide to intervene and subsidize the Spartans, and that subsidy is in the form of manpower for rowing and fleet construction.
Where previously the Spartans had never been a naval nation, now they had a fleet paid for with Persian gold. With Athens' navy decimated by the defeat in Sicily, the Spartans could now blockade the Athenian harbors. The great grain convoys from Egypt and the colonies could no longer get through. And finally, the Athenians began to starve in the streets. The people turned to their patron goddess, Athena. At the height of Athens' glory only 30 years before, Pericles had honored her with the most glorious temple ever seen. But the goddess could offer no help now. Athens, once so sure of her preeminence in the Greek world, was now home to a population ravaged by plague and war, besieged and starving. With her treasuries empty and her once proud fleet crippled. In 404 BC, Athens finally surrendered to the Spartan commander, Lysander. The Spartans' terms were heavy. The great walls which had defended the city were to be torn down. Her fleet was to be destroyed.
We had this wonderful scene of Lysander sailing into the Piraeus and dismantling the Athenian fleet. That's important because the destruction is symbolically a destruction of the Athenian Empire.
What remained of Athens' mighty navy was put to the torch, with only 12 ships allowed to remain. No longer would she rule the Mediterranean.
The Athenians became convinced that they could do, finally, in the end, more than they really could. And I think this is really the point in which the potential that Athenian democracy brought about could turn to tragedy. They could achieve great things, they could not achieve all great things.
But it would still take one more act of vanity and violence before the Athenians could redeem themselves. And their city could be reborn. Humiliated, their empire lost, the Athenians looked for someone to take the blame for their defeat. They searched for an enemy within their city walls, someone who had dared to question their dreams of supremacy. They searched for Socrates.
Socrates was a critic. He was critical of the thinking and the thought processes of his fellow citizens, and he was critical about the public affairs of Athens.
For over 50 years, Socrates had been publicly questioning and attacking the traditions of Athenian life. And around him he had gathered a group of youthful followers. Surely this must have weakened the city's moral character, undermined her hunger for victory. On the command of the assembly, Socrates was arrested on charges of questioning the state religion and corrupting the youth of the city.
I am quite sure that especially in a relatively small society like Athens, someone who is constantly questioning the principles by which the society has traditionally governed itself will be perceived as a very major danger by at least some people in society. You can easily see that a few hundred people might want him out, and they did.
The Athenians would now put to trial the one man who dared to question the way they lived their lives. Socrates' trial would be held in Athens' central marketplace, under a canopy to shade the fierce heat of the Greek sun. He would be tried by a jury of his fellow citizens, chosen at random. But this would not be a trial we would recognize.
The Athenian legal system was remarkably different from a modern system. There are no lawyers involved with this. There is no trained judge involved with this. It is, in some ways, a very frightening system from a modern point of view. The law did not have the same stature in Athens that it has in a modern society.
Socrates would be judged by the same kind of group he had watched condemn 6 generals to summary execution.